Jim Endrizzi all the way from Berkeley, California via Montana. What's going on?
Hard to keep track, huh, Bill?
No, I can't.
I'm rocking a Ford.
Jimmy's an old friend of mine from college. If you've ever had a genius friend, been lucky. He's my genius mad scientist buddy.
And Bill, I'll have you know that I'm rocking a $4 Goodwill shirt that my mom got from me from that Forest Lake Goodwill the other day. Hey, $1 off because it was senior discount day, so I kind of worked it illegally.
That's what you got to do. You got to
the right fashion.
When you get to the right age and your mom's a senior citizen, you got to get her to do your shopping and save some money.
Yeah, and the sandals were a little big, so I kind of shaved off the end a little bit.
So your mom is coordinating your swag.
Pretty.
No.
Jim always had style.
Leads me to the trough.
Jim always had style, but you're Italian.
Well, I got to wear black when I'm on your show, so I match. You know, I know ahead of time that. So you're too predictable now, Bill.
Oh, I don't mind. It's my style, man. You know, it's classic. Classic is.
So you do have a different belt buckle.
Every time.
You trying to get women to look certain places?
I'm giving them an excuse.
Just kind of curious about your techniques because, you know, you managed to get married, I know.
I did.
And I was shocked that you went to Vegas. You did the elope.
He didn't take you?
No.
You didn't
didn't
tell your
even tell
boy?
me.
I didn't tell anybody.
Wow. Not even mom?
They can mind their own business, man. They can find their own.
That was a pretty cheap date. I mean, for marriage.
Well, it wasn't about the.
You saved it up for later. Right?
It wasn't about the money. It was about wanting to be married, which I think a lot of people want to get married, and they don't even know what it is. So they spend all this they turn it into this big. I think it's a bunch of American bullshit. Maybe
well,
whatever.
your big whatever wedding, right?
Oh, we got to do this. Everything's got to be perfect, and then you don't even know the person. Then you got to do this thing. It's like, you know what? Get over yourself.
Well, if you're gonna have a perfect day, if the rest is gonna suck, you might as well at least have a day. That's what they figure, maybe. Or
my gal wasn't too down for getting all involved in it. So you know, if you want to be happy, you gotta. If you want to be happy, what do they say? Happy wife, happy life.
That's right.
If you want to have kids, and you're with somebody that doesn't want to have kids, and you're the dude, you're screwed.
I'm not the dude, by the way.
Well, you are.
I did see the Big Lebowski finally.
You don't look. You used to look like the dude.
I used to look like the dude.
I know.
A
mini dude.
And I was like, now I know what they were talking about.
Well, Jimmy used to have this mad scientist hair.
Oh, it was just an appearance.
He had this mad scientist hair thing going, and he's always on
Locks of Love, Bill.
You were on the cuts.
Program, you know, remember?
Did they take it?
Free haircut.
Because I've seen people like, if you get
Bill, I was pretty I was a scientist.
I've seen people get rejected by those people with their hair when they try to cut it off and bring it in. They took yours.
Oh, they liked it.
Yeah.
It was, you know, blonde, and they could give it to kids. And if it's gray, they sell it, I guess. But now they got to more of a money thing, and there's got to be so much money involved that I don't really do that program.
What does that mean? What do you mean?
Well, you know, nonprofits where the guy makes a lot of money isn't, to me, a nonprofit anymore. I mean, the number of nonprofits where the guy makes 6 figures or more.
It's a nonprofit except for the CEO.
Yeah, I don't know about that. So I was kind of getting my own thing going where I'm doing a little bit of research on the side with the company I started, the vitamin company I started. But, you know, I'm doing that for free, basically. And people can give me money if they want, but I don't solicit that. Yeah, it's basically, it's called Supernova C is the name of the company because 4 of the minerals in my vitamin are actually only made in supernovas, right? So supernovas are large explosions where you can actually get elements iron and heavier. Otherwise, you don't even get those, right? Mm-hmm. So our entire planet here is a coalescence of all these gases and dust where there are things like chromium, molybdenum, selenium that really aren't in a lot of the foods as high as they used to be. For example, like the non-organic foods have lower molybdenum because you can add nitrogen. You don't need the molybdenum iron cofactor to split nitrogen, right? That's a tough bond to break. And so one thing that I've noticed is that in animals, they make a lot of vitamin C per day, probably a bottle this big, an animal my size, but they don't have a regeneration system. Humans evolved the ability to regenerate vitamin C in their red blood cells. And that system is very complicated. It's selenoenzyme, glutathione, there's a glucose transporter involved, and a protein called somatin that modifies the glucose transporters. Now, people have mutations in these things, and then they don't make enough vitamin C. So some people need as much as a regular animal. They need to take 15, 20 grams a day even to be normal. Whereas, you know, 4 out of 5 people, probably a couple hundred milligrams is good for them.
So we got into trouble with all these processed foods and people not getting, I mean, as far as our diets,
well,
people aren't getting enough vitamin C.
Well, if you look at vitamin C, right, it's a macronutrient. So you need hundreds of times more than any other element or mineral. I mean, basically you need a lot of it, right? You need at least 60 milligrams, whereas the other molecules are on the microgram amounts, right? B vitamins and things like that. And so the animals 50 million years ago, whatever we used to be, some sort of monkey, small monkey, we actually dropped our ability to make vitamin C. And somehow that was good, it got locked in. It's probably because we were eating about 7 grams a day per 70 kilograms body weight. And so we weren't cooking our food either. So we were eating these large amounts, and so we dropped our vitamin C maker where we used to take glucose and make it into vitamin C with the multi-enzyme pathway. But now there's a mutation in there. And that mutation, I believe, allowed us, has been hypothesized for a while, allowed us to mutate more quickly and adapt to other food sources. So maybe why we're a jack of all trades as far as omnivores go is we can actually mutate till we find the right niche. But now we've mutated enough, right? We kind of want to stop that. I don't want to mutate and get cancer, right? So that's one of the main things about these large amounts of vitamin C. It reprograms the bacteria in your gut, right? So there are 100 bacteria for every human cell. Now they're very small compared to human cells, but they help you detoxify. And they use cytochromes and a number of different enzymes that use vitamin C, and one of which is called the 1011 translocation protein, and that modifies what's called cytosines. Now, cytosine is one of your 4 DNA bases that can change and be methylated. And one of the big differences between us and Neanderthals, like we were talking about earlier, is that methylation of these cytosines. It's essentially like it's a new type of base, and it codes differently. So it makes a strip of carbons along your DNA backbone to make it a little more greasy so proteins can recognize this stripe, turn genes on and off, and that's what happens in your bacteria. So animals, they make a lot of vitamin C, and it turns out that vitamin C can kill drug-resistant tuberculosis in vitro, in a petri dish. And so now they're looking into this as far as the antibacterial for, like, dogs can eat about anything, right? They make a lot of vitamin C. And so there's also stories about cats, right? They got 9 lives. Well, if you drop a cat on the ground, they actually have a enzyme that kicks in and makes a lot of vitamin C instantaneously, pretty quickly, on a very small time scale to help them deal with this, whatever trauma they went through.
So how much vitamin C should people be taking in a day?
Well, I think it depends on what you excrete, right? So in a very old study, 20% of the people who ate vitamin C didn't even excrete any until they ate 2 grams. And that's like 30 days worth in the current, 60 milligrams, or like a guy your size. If you're a smoker, you'd probably go 95 milligrams is the RDA. Now, it depends, though. If you have a mutation in this regeneration system, you may need as much as in a goat. Like, for example, a goat will make 14 grams a day, a mountain goat. Now, they're pretty hardy animals and make some of the most. But that's a lot of vitamin C, You're talking, half ounce of vitamin C a day. That's a hell of a demanding process. And so
this is the whole reason we're talking about this is Jim you have a vitamin company now, and you're
I call it C-Rocks because there's the minerals in the vitamin C.
It's all about vitamin C.
Yeah, and so the thing is there are a number of vitamin C's out there. Some of them have calcium predominantly. Others are just the acidic form, and so then you're eating 10 grams of acid, and that's going to give you intestinal problems.
So you came up with your own product.
So what's the safest to take? I mean, because I'm listening to you, and it seems like you're very scientific about your approach.
Yeah, I'm a PhD chemist by training, and so
I
was at Berkeley for about 8 years. I'll have to drop that in there. I did make it there, and my old boss, actually, Tom Albert, has died recently, and unfortunately, and has actually, now I have the data from that I collected, a terabyte of data from years ago about enzymatic control mechanisms and how one of the DNA bases is made that I'll be publishing upcoming. It's a pretty striking result where rather than having a state that's on and one that's off, you actually have an on state that's going back and forth between the two. And those of you who are astute will notice that I did it the opposite way. This is off and that's on. But then I had a paper that showed that off was on and on was off, and that was in '98.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about an enzyme that makes DNA, precursor for DNA. So imagine it's called aspartate transcarbamylase. So it takes aspartate and it takes a carbamyl group and it actually puts it on. So it does a chemical transformation to start making the DNA base cytosine, right? And so what you do is you'll make this and then see the cytosine, once it's made, comes back and binds and shuts the enzyme off. ATP, the energy molecule, binds to it and turns it on. So they used to think that you would facilitate the changing of the structure from off, or sorry, this is on, to the off state. And so 90% would be on in the daytime, and when you're sleeping, those 90% would be off, right? But now we're coming to the conclusion that it looks like it's the flexibility. And I predicted this in '98 while I was at Berkeley, which was at
So that's talking about the cat thing.
And so this thing would be going, so this is the daytime, you're kind of like going faster. When you're running, it's going really fast.
It's working by a process of need. I mean, things kick, like for a cat, for example, That's why they have 9.
If you run out of this nutrient, or this DNA in this case, then you'll start making more. But once you got enough, it attenuates and shuts off. So you have a steady state levels. This is how, you know, allosteric enzymes work. That's what they're called. They're allosteric.
So why do we have to take more if we can make it?
Well, the thing about vitamin C is we don't make it, right? And we used to make it. So with this this is a whole different thing. This is a chemotherapy target. So I did chemotherapy drugs to do the off state, right? So then but basically you're killing human cells as well as the drug cells. It's just not as fast because this.
That's why we got rickets back in the day and lose all our teeth when we went to sea and all these things. And
well, vitamin C was known in Greek
limes.
times, right? I mean, they called somebody sorbutic if they had this. They're falling apart at the seams, and they're collagen, 25% of your dry weight, right? That holds you together. It needs to be decorated with hydroxyl groups with proline hydroxylase using vitamin C in order to be coherent together. Otherwise, you have a bunch of greasy ropes that just slide against each other and your cells come apart. And so one thing is that if you have too much sugar, even a couple cans of pop is enough to start putting holes in your cells. It's kind of called RAGE. It's rage-induced by glucose. And vitamin C actually can help clear those problems up. This glucose and vitamin C both compete for the same transporters, called glucose transporters, 1 through 14. And it turns out that now they're knowing vitamin C goes in through glucose transporter 1 for sure, and probably some of the others. And so this is a complication in diabetes and cancer, is that how do you attenuate that, right? So you really want to lower your glucose and up your vitamin C levels in order to get this antioxidant effects and the effects to these antioxidant enzymes. There's one called cytochrome B561 that actually does is facilitate the transfer of the vitamin C to inside the cell, right? You have oxidized and reduced form. One goes oxidized to reduced, the other one goes reduced to oxidized, and they kind of flip. It's a switch. And so those are very important in detoxification. And a lot of enzymes that detoxify actually are known now to use vitamin C and iron. And the iron will keep reduced if you have enough vitamin C around. So you can imagine that if you have a free iron or a free copper, they can fluctuate between iron plus 2 to 3.
So what are these big drug companies going to do, though? If they know, like, for example, I know these big drug companies, there's a lot of benefits to aspirin, but they don't want to, they can't own aspirin.
Yeah, but you do hemorrhage a bit of blood in your cells. I don't like that idea.
My point is that there's benefits with aspirin. I'm just using this for an example of something that nobody has the trademark to, that everybody can make money on.
So well, I did notice in the paper when they said, okay, the vitamin C kills this and that and helps with cancer, but no one's going to get rich on that kind of thing, right? And so why go after that? And it's like, well, big deal. If it's a good product and you can actually make a living and produce something that actually does have efficacy against a lot of ills.
That's my point. Great. So you're pushing a product that, you know, these companies, they want to own the product they're pushing so they can make the mega money. And so it's like they don't get behind aspirin or vitamin C or some of these things yet. The things
well, I mean, people are jumping on that bandwagon. Pfizer actually bought a Lacer Corporation to jump onto the largest vitamin C maker on earth, right? You knew about that.
I did not.
It was March 27th in 2012, actually. About 3 days before I arrived down at the Hormel Institute, I was thinking of doing some clinical trials on some of their compounds, but they quit making them after they bought the company. It was called Supergram 2, and it was something I'd been taking for many years. It was similar to the mix that I have. A Nobel laureate back a ways said, hey, these are the right minerals to add with the C because of looking at what the physiology of a mammal is. And so it's sort of very much along those lines with 9 different minerals. And so another thing that's interesting is that somebody said at one point, hey, bioflavonoids increase vitamin C uptake, but it actually shuts down vitamin C uptake in the brain. Now, vitamin C has to oxidize to a cyclic dehydrated hemiacetal to get across the blood-brain barrier. The active form is ascorbate, that's negative charge. That won't go into your brain. And so if you have this vitamin C in you, ascorbate, then it gets it mops up a free radical, then it can go through to your brain, and then it can actually go in through a transporter into the hippocampus, sodium-dependent vitamin C transporters, to concentrate that tissue to like 300 times of other tissues, because very sensitive areas of the brain need a lot of vitamin C, such as your eye, right? So there's pumps that do this, and it's an ATP-dependent process, so it burns energy. And so some people will eat C and they'll get depleted a little bit. They'll have all the sodium and it'll just fire the vitamin C will actually go in an active transport process using ATP. Whereas with an ascorbate form, if there are a lot of free radicals around, you're out in the sun after eating a bunch, that stuff will just drift into your cells with no penalty, no cost in ATP. And that's probably what we used to do, right? We used to have this sort of diffusion that would happen, right? So we were always outside, you know, we were in the sun a lot, we were getting chased, we were probably massively stressed. imagine this big of a monkey 50 million years ago running around the jungle.
I have a question for you.
Oh my God.
Like to the general population of the public, like you were talking about how people drink a lot of soda pop or pop and how it has a lot of side effects. And what would you recommend to them as far as picking the right combination of vitamin C with the right, like some people, they don't get enough calcium during the winter months, and you know your immune system goes down because you're constantly trying to adjust to
Well, you do need about a gram of calcium a day, but I don't put a lot in my vitamin C as a ratio because of the fact that, for one thing, people are probably getting plenty in their diet, and for another is that the calcium oxalate is actually a kidney stone. And so vitamin C can sometimes break down to oxalate. You see it in the literature. Very rarely where people actually get this happening. But I have, you know, a lot lower amount of calcium than some of the other products out there. I mean, I have mainly potassium. 98% of people right now are potassium deficient. And most of us have tons of sodium. So I have a very micro amount of sodium. And so with this large amount of sodium in your body, it actually helps facilitate these glucose transporters. So it's, in a kind of a way, it's going to help your hippocampus. But what's weird is like bioflavonoids and certain things that inhibit those uptake proteins.
So how would people get more,
Well, it's pretty hard in a way. I mean, of course, oranges. I mean, I have friends who eat lots of oranges every day, 5 oranges a day. And then a good buddy of mine who I worked with over in Berkeley actually ended up getting colitis from eating that much sugar. And citrus, yeah, and citrus. Well, they don't know for sure that that's what it was, but you know, it's hard to get the C without the sugar. Now, rose hips is a great way, right? You know, roses, right? And rose hips out of a particular type of roses actually are the most potent, you know, one of the most potent forms.
That's like a herb, right?
Yeah, and those aren't as high as sugar, but you can, you know, most products do have more sugar than C in them, right? That have vitamin C, so that's kind of a problem. As far as I see it, I think it's the ratio that's pretty critical. And so an animal, right, they're not really eating any sugar ever, and they're always going for the salt to get the sodium, and so they seem to have a different desires as humans, but we love salt too, right? So what's that craving is, it's not necessarily that bad. We need 4 grams a day. That's quite a bit of salt, really. And so I know people on salt restrictive diets that are actually been diagnosed as low sodium. But they stick to that diet, you know, and it doesn't make any sense sometimes.
My concern is that, well, we have, what, 37% or more children in America that have obesity. And
That's the big issue here. I mean, the thing is, I really do think this is a big player. I mean, 38 grams in one pop, I mean, that's crazy, right? I'm always suggesting people eat a gram or 2 of the vitamin C, but if you have 40-fold excess of the other molecule that's competing, then how does it get in there? I mean, I don't really...
How do we rectify that problem? I mean, we got a huge...
Personally, I mean, I think just each person has to take it within themselves to change their diet to a certain way. Yeah, or we get a lot of side-branched carbos. I mean, Bill's not a fan of potatoes, but they're so highly side-branched that it's different, right? And you have enzymes that chew these things down. There's amylases that do this and will help you put carbos into your brain big time.
Because potatoes have a lot of potassium too, right?
I mean,
you're kind of
exactly. That's another good
sweet
one.
Potato, right?
Yeah, exactly. And bananas, of course. But
bananas.
You know, another thing is interesting is that, you know, people know that you know, potassium is actually, there's a slight bit of radiation with potassium. It's kind of interesting. You know, there's really no way out of that. And that's like, you know, like people who have like, there's certain kinds of salt, like popcorn salt, that has the really fine granules that's also potassium in there. But there's really no way around that. It's just a natural background level.
What's the difference between sea salt, which is a big trend, and regular table salt?
Well, you know, you get it out of the sea, you got more minerals in there. I mean, you have a few trace elements that aren't in the regular table salt, which is purely sodium chloride, whereas you'll get other minerals in there. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting because you could just say sea salt, right? And I think that all sea salts aren't the same. It'd be very nice to have somebody do like ICP-MS, it's called, to do a situation where you can look at every element and what's in there and how much is in there. And that's one thing that I do with my vitamin companies. We look through certain techniques to see, okay, how much mineral is in there, how much additive, how much, is there any, you know, do we have any heavy atoms in there and how much and things like that. And I see a problem in the dietary supplement field is that if you sell fewer than 50,000 bottles per year, you're not even subject to most labeling requirements. You have to be real careful. I actually voluntarily went through that process, and it took more work to get the formula finalized and through the FDA approval process. But there really isn't an FDA approval process. It's just more like, here are requirements for labeling, and they're not as strict as they, I think, should be. And so I go to stricter labeling requirements and put everything in there and how much, just because I feel like you need to know. Like, well, you don't really need to tell them how much of the other elements in there. You just got to tell them iron and A and D and things like that. So it's kind of interesting where I think we need more rigorous labeling requirements.
Yeah, it's scientific, man. I mean, if you're doing...
You need to start with the fast.
Well, and also we got to do this thing. We can't call supplements just supplements. Vitamins and minerals are very different than supplements. They should be separate things. I mean, some supplements, there's no known requirement. You can live without ginkgo biloba just fine, for example. And then if you know, different people make it different ways, you don't know what else is in there. There's a lot of molecules in there, you know. I like to deal with specific molecules and know how much. And versus these gamish where you're not really sure. I mean, I think that a lot of people do have a lot of efficacy in taking like homeopathic supplements. I mean, a small amount of a molecule to turn on, for example, sorry to interrupt, but for example, mercury. You're not exposed to mercury, you won't turn on what's called the MER receptor in certain bacteria. So you get a certain amount of mercury, then the mercury repressor turns on, boom, detoxification system's on. And so there's a very small threshold, so a small exposure to toxin, which Bill, I think, is a fan of. Small exposure to toxin over the years. Well, back in college, maybe. I mean,
he probably was toxic himself.
Working out itself can create all kinds of toxins.
He probably was.
I mean, Bill, have you noticed the big crash that comes with
telling my business?
What if you eat a bunch of sugar and then try to work out? What do you feel?
I can do anything.
You can just burn it off, right?
Hell yeah. I can go eat. It's just like some people, I think a lot of it, food is timing too. It's like,
right.
You don't want to be eating a bunch of sugars at night. You don't get your sugar, if you want to call it sugars or carbohydrates or whatnot. If you have to eat, a lot of people are obese in this country. They want to blame the processed food, all the high sodium, all the high fat, which I think is a mistake to blame. But we never look at, well, what about people eating late at night? All these people eat it. It's like putting money in the bank, and they eat the wrong. If you had to eat something at night, the best thing to eat would be protein, and just go to bed, or just tough it out, and then eat in the morning, and your metabolism will pick up when you get those. You know, like I eat bacon and eggs every breakfast, and people are like, "Oh, you're not supposed to. That's cholesterol." And now they're finding out, "Oh, we're supposed to." You ever notice that the people that live the oldest on the planet? They eat a lot of bacon and eggs eaters, so I'm down with that. Ask Jimmy. I know you know that's true.
Well, I haven't eaten a lot of those lately. I've changed my diet. I don't eat breakfast basically. I have coffee instead, and I consider it a bean juice. You know, it's
bean juice. You know what though?
It's a vegetarian morning.
Coffee's such a great food. It is such a great healthy item. I think.
Did you see the large study that came out? I believe it was Johns Hopkins, one of these meta reviews, meta-analysis of all the studies. You know, they had 50,000 people in one study, and they basically showed that women were ahead of the game, heart health and other things, if they drank at least 4 cups a day. And the more cups associated with better health. And so it's sort of like, well, there's a lot of studies like this, right? It's counterintuitive. And yet sometimes, we think, okay, this is bad because it was told, this is going to make you jittery, or this is going to cause your heart to palpitate or whatever. And sure enough, short term, this can happen with caffeine. But caffeinated beverages like coffee in the long run seem to improve heart health.
If you're too jacked up on caffeine, if you take vitamin C, I've heard
I do tend to get almost too much energy, but closing on 50 this year, I'm not feeling like that's an issue.
Yeah.
Back a ways, you know how it is. Back when we were 20s and we were going around Duluth, we had too much energy, right?
Too much. Nobody could keep up.
I remember you guys in the basement of the wrestler house and some of those shenanigans, You guys think you're tough? I don't know. What goes on with the hormones back in college, Bill? Can you remember?
No,
it was a blur kind of.
I'm still...
Well, they say, I was reading in Men's Health magazine that men get, 30 or something, their testosterone level or something reduces or...
Well, the testosterone does drop. Now, there's one thing that's a big issue is that I think one thing is look at cholesterol. Cholesterol is a precursor for testosterone. So taking all these cholesterol inhibitors may not be your best bet if you want. But then what? Then you go counteract it with Viagra? I mean, come on.
That's like statin drugs and all that kind of stuff.
Well, some of those seem to be real promising. They shut off the blood flow to the tumors, but they just didn't work out as good as looked like. They looked like it was bam.
What about
deal? It does work.
What would you guys recommend as far as men
keeping your testosterone?
Having a proper level of testosterone without becoming toxic or becoming,
Well, I would say just to make sure you're getting 100% of all your vitamins and minerals for one thing. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But then your workout schedule, obviously, Bill, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly. There's a camp that says squatting.
And some weightlifting beyond 50 seems to help. Now, one thing about running.
The point, I got to ask you, I got to bring this into it. I think there's this, it's funny that there's a lot of benefits to squatting, that it's like we're designed to defecate in a squatting position.
Bill,
so let me finish now.
Yes,
I know it's big. So these Eastern peoples, they had these toilets were they're like a pan, they're like a cake pan, and they'd like have to take a dump on that thing and squat. So you got us Americans generally couldn't even, and I know this because of the wrestlers, and I've been to Japan, you know, I've been wrestling over there, and some of these guys, they had to like take it, like Andre the Giant, he had to take a chair, pop a hole through it, a folding chair, and then take a dump through the chair onto the deal because he wasn't strong enough to be in that position. And this is a
couldn't even hold himself up.
Right, but that's a man with giantitis that weighs weighs ridiculous. But the point is, there's a lot of people that don't do that, and that's something that supposedly there's a camp that squatting stimulates your pituitary gland, releasing testosterone. So guess what? Billy Blaze squats 3 times a week, and that's what I'm talking about.
Well, here's the thing: is that this dovetails into exactly what we're talking about. There's a person who is studying chairs at Berkeley, right? And kind of called him, jokingly, the chair of chairs. And they actually studied like chair use, right? And they said that was a huge problem with osteoporosis in women. It's that in countries where they didn't have chairs to use for the bathroom, where there were no toilets, the squatting position for women built their muscles, and they got less osteoporosis, and their bone loss was way less. And so there's a system that turns on from that squatting position. You're exactly right. And they spent a lot of money.
And that's one thing.
So you came up independently on that exact same answer, which seems to be a big thing. Like if people just go out camping and you use the bathroom in that way, and then, you know, it's like not very long, but it's long enough.
We've done it's something, I don't have any idea how many centuries, how many millennia humans have been, and this is only in the last 500 years. It's like, okay, we're not doing that way anymore. That's barbaric. Well,
well, there's a lot of weird things about the way human diet evolved. Now that we know enough to sort of back sequence, right? It's like everybody started eating grains at the same time on all the continents. Now, who flew around telling everybody to start doing that? That's my question for you, Bill.
Well, from my theory on it, is grains allowed obviously.
Well, you got sort of something against grains. I do. I think starch is a big good thing.
I do. They haven't been around long enough. I mean, all the new processed food and all these new foods, our bodies haven't been eating it long enough to. I mean, look at the.
Maybe your ancestors are different.
Look at the.
You're probably more Neanderthal.
Right? Possibly, I would guess. You too. But I would say that the people, if you keep distracting me, I'm not going to be able to finish your question, by the way. But we got
a minute and 20 to finish.
Okay, but we haven't. If this is time, the mankind from here to here, the agricultural revolution is right here. That's your little great, or maybe the last ice age is right here.
Not much time for us to evolve.
Right. So we haven't kept, the Japanese for example, have been eating rice for so much longer than us, they can turn part of it into protein. We cannot. I cannot. I'm like analogous to the Irish people, of which I am one, or the Native Americans, who have a predisposition to get drunk easier than other people.
Oh, yeah.
We haven't had it around enough. And there you go. And I love you.
50 seconds.
Thank you.
Hold on. First
it's
off,
been
thank
nice.
you. Tell the people how they can get in touch with you. Where your business is located, your Twitter, your Facebook.
I don't have that. What I do is I just have a supernovac.com. I've also got a site that is under construction called vitamincScience.com, where we're going to be laying some things out in layman's terms. I have 22,000 connections to papers that are published with vitamin C in the title on my sites. And I have a new one called ScienceKnobs.com, where knobs like me publishing our science. I'm just putting it out there, stuff I worked on for 30 years, all of my different institutes, and I'm just kind of shoveling it out there. And if you want to donate $1, you can, you know.
That was Jim's rip on everybody.
I'm supposed to be at a conference today in Missoula, and I'm here instead. I was supposed to be at the American Chemical Society meeting today, but I didn't.
Awesome job,
couldn't be everywhere.
Thank you.